Good morning. Good to have you with us on a busy Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment and will join us in just a few minutes. We begin this Friday morning with those devastating wildfires that continue to plague Southern California. We now know the fires have killed at least 10 people, with nearly 180,000 people forced out of their homes. The Palisades Fire, which remains the largest fire, has now burned nearly 20,000 acres. That's an area bigger than Manhattan. Officials say it's destroyed about 5,000 structures and is now about 6% contained. Firefighters also battled a new brush fire, the Kenneth Fire, in the Woodland Hills area of L.A. That led to more evacuations, but those orders were later lifted. The Eaton Fire, which started outside of Pasadena, has now spread up Mount Wilson. That fire threatening communication towers and the historic Mount Wilson Observatory. New drone footage is giving us a bird's eye view of the widespread damage caused by these fires. Many homes and businesses remain without power this morning. L.A. Mayor Karen Bass spoke yesterday about a call she had with President Biden and the relief that is heading to the region.
The president announced the federal government would pay for 100% of disaster response costs from the wildfires in this area. This is unprecedented because usually it is not 100%.
We have team coverage ahead this hour, including the latest on the forecast and those strong wind gusts expected to pick up again today. We're also going to catch up with the Salvation Army and its relief efforts. But let's begin with NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin joining us again from Altadena. Dana, good morning. So you are at the Eaton Fire, a stubborn one, proving to be a challenge for firefighters. 0% contained as of last night, burning thousands of acres there. Just tell us, what's the latest on the ground this morning?
Yeah, Joe, good morning to you. That fire now 13,000 acres. I will tell you, compared to what we saw yesterday, things are a lot different in terms of law enforcement. You can see behind me, we've got more California Highway Patrol vehicles. And even as we turn this way, you can see several flashing red and blue lights down the way. The California National Guard has also deployed here. We've got several in Hummers and vehicles just like this. We actually saw a caravan of National Guard's crew members rolling through this area. You know, right now there is a curfew in place. It lasts from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's because there is still a safety concern in these areas, and it's also to keep people from going into these communities and possibly looting or causing more devastation out there. Sheriff Robert Luna for L.A. County actually talked a little bit about that. Listen.
Our goal is to attempt to implement a curfew within the specific impacted areas around the two fire areas, both for Palisades and Eaton. Having the National Guard with us, which will augment those resources, will help send a stronger message, keep people out of the impacted areas so we don't continuously victimize the people who have already been victimized.
And that message is very loud and clear. They are being very diligent in keeping people from going into this area. Compared to yesterday, we saw several people just able to walk in, whether they were residents or not. Joe?
So, Dana, let's talk more about what we just heard from the sheriff there, some of the resources coming in to help with these fires. I mean, the fight's been going on for days. Yeah. That is pushing Southern California firefighters and first responders to the limit. What other outside help is on the way?
So additional 900 firefighters are being deployed to this area to try to help with those firefighting efforts. I was listening to one firefighter talk on another network, and he just talked about how they are pushed to the brink, but that they are not giving up this fight. Some of them having to sleep nearby those firefighting zones just so that they are not giving up. This is a relentless fight, and those firefighters are vowing to stay and to give as much as they've got. Joe?
Dana, I also want to ask you about an evacuation alert that was sent out yesterday in error. It went out to nearly 10 million people in the L.A. area. I mean, folks are already incredibly anxious, on standby because of these fires. Yeah. What happened here?
So this happened just before 4 o'clock last night, and our crew is on kind of like the graveyard shift. So we were already in bed, some of us, and that thing started blaring. It was very nerve-wracking because we had that Kenneth fire that popped up, so we did not know if this was a new fire or if this was the Kenneth fire. And then 20 minutes later, a message was sent to say disregard. Officials say that this was not human caused and that they are working with the system operator to try to figure out what went wrong. They say that the evacuation area that was supposed to receive that alert was entered correctly into their system. So we definitely have a lot of questions as to what went wrong. A lot of people, were freaked out about that, but luckily they sent a message saying disregard that message, and I think that put a lot of people at ease. But obviously, it's a really tense situation out here because communities have been wiped off the map. So when you get an alert and you aren't expecting it, it's really concerning.
Understandably so. All right, Dana, thanks so much for your reporting. We appreciate it. For more on the volunteer efforts, let's bring in Major Anthony Barnes. He is General Secretary of the Salvation Army Southern California Division. Major Barnes, thank you for your time this morning after what I know has been a long couple days here. You're one of those organizations that's you're already there embedded in the Southern California community. You're there all year long. Talk about how you're helping people who've been evacuated and also those who've lost everything this week.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. We're just trying to surround those who are in the most need right now. You mentioned being here as part of the community. We're a part of the community before disaster happens, during and after. And in fact, some of our own people have been impacted by this. But it is our pleasure to serve those who are struggling. We're out there feeding from moment to moment, meal to meal, making sure that people have their most basic needs met: water, food, clothing, just to meet those immediate needs, and then we'll move into the next stage when that time comes.
I mean, when you look at just the unprecedented scale of this destruction, it's overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
Well, we begin with just what I mentioned. What is of most need right now? Aside from making sure they have food and water and clothing, we need to make sure that we help to begin to restore hope. So we have our teams out there, emergency disaster response experts that are providing skilled relief services, whether that's emotional care, spiritual care, food, clothing, water. And we're waiting even now for when the evacuations are lifted so that we can walk alongside of those folks in their communities, many which have lost homes. And we want to walk right alongside them as they're kind of discovering what's next.
When people arrive at the evacuation centers, what is it you find they need the most right away?
Many of them are just trying to figure out, how do I get in contact with other loved ones? They've lost so much. Many have even lost the way to communicate their phones and any of the electronics that they had. So we're trying to make a way to provide them even with access to communication. How can we get them in contact with their family members or their loved ones? How do we reconnect families that may have been on different sides of town? And then, of course, those immediate needs that I mentioned before.
This is a crisis, of course. It's going to be unfolding for many months, if not years, after these fires are finally put out. How can the public help the Salvation Army do the kind of work that's needed now and that's going to be needed for those many months to come?
For the many months that are to come, we're going to need lots of different resources. But right now, we are trying to meet those immediate needs. And so monetary donations are needed more than ever, especially in the moment. People can go and visit salvationarmyusa.org. or they can call 1-800-SALARMY and make a donation. This gives us the flexibility to meet the myriad of needs that are coming before us. But yes, we are going to have restoration of pre-disaster services coming up soon, where we want to make sure we get people to the state that they were at before this disaster happened. And so we will use some of those donations for that, some for what the immediate needs are, and to make sure that people are whole again.
A reminder, it is a step-by-step process, and there are so many people who don't live in Southern California who are looking for ways to help. This is one way to do that. Major Barnes, thank you for your help this morning and for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, and thank you for your support.
It is a week of fire and ice. While crews fight to put out the raging wildfires in California, much of the South is in the midst of a major winter storm and deep freeze. As you can see, states from the plains and southeast are dealing with a combination of snow, sleet, and freezing rain. Governors are declaring states of emergency as the storm creates major travel disruptions. More than 2,000 flights have been canceled in and out of Dallas airports already since the storm started. Southerners have barely recovered from another storm that hit earlier in the week. Well, now comes this new round of winter weather. Some of the heaviest snowfall expected today in Arkansas and Tennessee. With everything that's going on, let's take a closer look at what you can expect with your Morning News Now weather. Meteorologist Angie Lastman has been busy all week long and is tracking the very latest all across the country. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Let's start with that winter storm that you just mentioned, then we'll move to fires here in a moment. Big chunk of the country, nearly 100 million people under these winter alerts. So this is the area, these are the areas, I should say, that are going to be affected by this winter storm as it continues to be on the move through the day today. Here's what we've currently got. Notice the snow across parts of the Midwest, stretching back to places like Illinois and Missouri, but also stretching down into parts of the Southeast. We've got the rainy side of this as well as we get a little farther to the south, and that's going to be kind of the scene that we set for parts of the Southeast and points south of that here as we go through the day today. But it's going to be the snow for places like, as you mentioned, Little Rock, where we'll see that heaviest kind of snow set up from basically now through noon, the first half of the day. And notice how high those totals could be, up to 9 inches. We could have more than a half of a foot across this region. St. Louis going to see some additional snowfall. Nashville, as we get closer to basically 6 p.m., we'll start to see this wrap up. But we've got the whole day to kind of pick up some additional snowfall, again, up to 7 inches for that region. And Atlanta, it's not just the snow that we're going to watch for here through the afternoon hours. It's also the potential to see up to 1/4 of an inch of icing on those roadways. So again, this is going to be problematic for travel, air travel, but also road travel. You'll want to be able to get a little extra time for that morning commute in some of these spots. Big picture look for out west. We've got the red flag warnings still in effect. Those are going to stay at least through tonight. I wouldn't be surprised if they're extended beyond that. But 17 million people across this region with the Santa Ana winds still coming in around 60 miles per hour and higher in some spots. We've also got those relative humidity values. They've seen a slight uptick. We're into the double digits potentially by the time the day goes on, but still very dry by all standards of things. Here's the 5 fires that we're still watching. Notice what we're seeing as far as current wind gusts right now. Places like near the Lydia fire, 65-mile-per-hour gusts in the last hour. We've got 50s closer to Santa Clarita. Closer to the coast, not quite as gusty, still 10, 15, even close to 30-mile-per-hour gusts are going to be possible. But up to 50 and 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts, I should say, will be possible through the day today, specifically the first half of the day. Now, second half of the day, notice what happens. We've got a lot of single digits out here for our wind forecast as we get into the evening hours. 10, 15, 20-mile-per-hour winds, not great still when you're fighting fire, but a lot better than what we're expecting for the first half of the day. But notice that we still are going to see this kind of a roller coaster ride when it comes to these winds as we set ourselves up for another Santa Ana wind event. So, Joe, this is what we've got for the fire weather threat today. Still a critical risk for some, but more Santa Ana wind events to come as we wrap up the weekend and head into next week.
Tough to hear that. All right, Angie, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Today will bring a landmark moment in U.S. politics. President-elect Trump will be sentenced later this morning in his New York criminal hush money case. Once that happens, he'll officially become a convicted felon just 10 days before his inauguration. The sentencing is moving forward after the Supreme Court denied Mr. Trump's 11th hour request to block the sentencing late yesterday. That was a 5-4 ruling, with the majority saying, in part, the burden that sentencing imposed on Mr. Trump was, quote, relatively insubstantial. Last year, the president-elect was convicted on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. It's all related to hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. Daniels testified she had a sexual encounter with Mr. Trump in 2006, which he denied. NBC News correspondent Yasmin Masugian is outside the courthouse in New York City. Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, is with us on set to break it all down. Good morning to both of you. Yasmin, let's start with you. The judge has already indicated there will not be any jail time, no prison time for Mr. Trump, who is expected to attend virtually today. So what can we expect from today's sentencing?
This is finality from a months-long trial, a years-long story as well, Joe, as we well know, regarding the hush money trial that we all watched throughout the spring with then former President Donald Trump, now President-elect, just 10 days away from his inauguration, being sentenced today in the building behind me by Judge Juan Merchan. The expectations here are pretty clear in that Merchan, in issuing this date of January 10th for his sentencing, saying this is going to be an unconditional discharge, essentially meaning there will be, in fact, no penalty, but will provide finality to this entire moment, this entire trial that we all watched play out in the spring. And then there will come, obviously, the appeal. What we're expecting today, essentially, is hearing from the prosecuting attorneys from the DA's office, followed by Todd Blanche, the lead defense attorney, along with likely President-elect Donald Trump, again, just 10 days away. I mean, the unprecedented moment of this time from his inauguration. And then Judge Juan Merchan likely issuing the finality of this whole thing, right? Issuing the sentencing for President-elect Donald Trump. And one more thing I'll say is, as we mentioned last spring, as we were watching this trial play out, we said, in fact, former President Donald Trump, now President-elect, was fighting for his freedom when it came to the November elections. And in fact, he won that freedom when he won the election in November, Joe.
So, Danny, unconditional discharge, assuming that is the sentence here, what exactly does that mean for the president-elect?
A lot of people are calling this no jail time. That's really only half the story. Under New York law, an unconditional discharge is an option for a judge. As a defense attorney, I've never seen it because it's essentially a sentence of no sentence whatsoever. Yes, no jail time, but no probation, no monitoring, no ankle bracelet, no house arrest, no community service. It's nothing. And in even talking to my practitioner friends, we agree, has anyone even seen this before? Because how often would you expect, especially in a felony, admittedly a low-level felony situation, that the client would get nothing at all? You would expect probation, but that is constitutionally impossible. Justice Merchan knows it because any sentence that has any kind of tail, any kind of lingering existence after Trump is inaugurated is arguably completely unconstitutional and void from the moment he takes office.
So, Yasmin, we know that Mr. Trump did react to yesterday's Supreme Court decision, maybe kind of a surprising reaction from him. Talk about that and just how he's likely to proceed moving forward after today.
So let's remember, this date has been delayed multiple times, right? Initially, it was scheduled for mid-July. It was delayed twice. And then the election came. Todd Blanche obviously lobbied to delay it once again because of the unprecedented nature of sentencing a now president-elect Donald Trump. We heard from President-elect Donald Trump just yesterday evening, somewhat surprising to say the least, especially when it came to his opinion on the Supreme Court's decision in allowing this sentencing to go forward. Let's take a listen to that, Joe, and then we'll talk on the other side.
To appeal anyway, just psychologically, because frankly, it's a disgrace. It's a judge that shouldn't have been on the case. He's a highly conflicted judge, and they called for an appeal. So I read it, and I thought it was a fair decision, actually. So I'll do my little thing tomorrow.
So unsurprising that he would go after Judge Juan Merchan, but not necessarily surprising, in fact, what we all expected, that President-elect Donald Trump will, in fact, be appealing going forward, Joe.
Yeah, so Danny, let's talk about what comes after today, and that will be this appeals process, which is typically pretty standard. Explain to us what we can expect here.
Yes, technically, even though Trump has been convicted, and he was convicted months ago, the actual conviction is not final. The judgment is not final until after sentencing. And that's the way it is in most jurisdictions, including the federal system. The notice of appeal, your opportunity to appeal, you can't appeal until the judgment's final. It's not final till sentence is entered. Once that's entered on the system in the trial court level, then you have your 30 days in which to file your notice of appeal. And after that, not a whole lot happens. It's a lot of paperwork, preparing briefs, but that's procedurally what will happen. And really, when you think about it, this is the first appropriate time, really, that Trump could have been appealing. And yet we know he's been appealing throughout the life of this entire case. This is normally the very first time a defendant appeals, but that's not the case in this case.
All right, Danny, we're going to ask you to stick around for our next story. Yasmin, thank you so much for your reporting. We really do appreciate it. Speaking of the Supreme Court, this morning, the justices are set to hear arguments that could determine the future of the social media platform TikTok here in the U.S. In 10 days, a controversial federal law banning TikTok is set to take effect. The bipartisan legislation was passed last year. Several lawmakers allege that China-based TikTok poses a threat to national security, arguing it could be used by that country to manipulate public opinion or get access to Americans' data. The law states that the platform's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, has to sell or divest it by January 19th, so that's 9 days from now, or it gets banned. TikTok says the law violates both its First Amendment rights and that of its millions of American users. When the law was enacted in April, ByteDance said it would not sell the social media service. Critics say the law violates Americans' right to free speech. We have team coverage of TikTok's case this morning. NBC News legal analyst Annie Savallo sticking around, and our own Savannah Sellers is in Washington, D.C. Savannah, good morning. Let's start with you. Set the stage for us. What can we expect from today's hearing? What are both sides going to be arguing here?
Hi, Joe. Good morning from a frigid but gorgeous Washington, D.C. I'll be heading in to hear the arguments in just a couple hours. But here's where we stand this morning, where things start. So TikTok is arguing that banning TikTok would be a violation of free speech, both for the company as well as the users. TikTok has sued over this, but so have users of TikTok, creators on that app. On the other hand, the government is saying that TikTok is a national security threat because its parent company, it's called ByteDance, has Chinese ownership. There's a concern over what could happen to American data, the 170 million or so Americans who use that app, the information that they're feeding it by using it every day, as well as if there would be an implication for China, an ability for China to push any type of content to American users. Now, we have not seen any direct evidence of that. We've been asking questions to see if it's even possible. No smoking gun, though, and much of these legal arguments have actually been redacted. So that's what I will be listening for today in court. Two things. First of all, will we learn anything that makes that fear of a national security threat more concrete? And secondly, how can we read the tea leaves for what we start to hear from the justices? I'm sure Danny will touch on this, but what we were waiting to hear was if the Supreme Court would pause the law in the meantime, because right now there's just 9 days until that ban goes into effect. Will the Supreme Court pause it? So far, they have chosen not to. And will they come out pretty strong against TikTok? What type of questions are they asking today? What will we hear in arguments? For now, President-elect Trump, he has asked the Supreme Court to pause it. They have not responded to that, but that's something that we actually could learn today. Does the ban go on pause?
All right, so Danny, let's look at the past here and some of the precedents and past First Amendment cases that are similar to this. We've really seen the court rule against the government, deciding national security doesn't require censoring what newspapers could publish or what information Americans have access to. This goes beyond publication. This is saying we're going to get rid of the entire platform. What are you expecting? What are the justices going to likely need to hear to either stop this law or say, hey, let's move forward with this?
That's right. And many times the law itself will get struck down if it falls into a category, and you're going to hear these words, strict scrutiny. What makes this case so unique is that the lower court actually concluded that the highest level of scrutiny of the statute, in other words, the statute had the highest likelihood of being struck down under this test. And it's any time a law infringes on the content of your First Amendment speech rights, it is highly likely to be struck down. And yet the lower court, the D.C. Court of Appeals, concluded that even though this very difficult test applies, the government has met it based on these allegations of this threat to national security. That seems to me to be a test that another court, the Supreme Court, could come down on the other side, simply because the nature of strict scrutiny is that the government is the underdog and the challenger here, TikTok, is the odds-on favorite to win.
So, Savannah, TikTok, to put it quite simply here, as you mentioned, the court's going to have to act pretty quickly. Do we have an idea of just how quickly the court could act in this situation? And if this does take effect, how is it going to impact the more than 110 million TikTok users here in the U.S.?
Yeah, Joe, so today we would not actually get the decision from justices. We wouldn't get an opinion or anything like that today. But we could hear them decide to put a stay on this ban if they are feeling like it's going to take them more than 9 days to decide what they are going to do. And again, as I just mentioned, President-elect Trump has also asked for that. We heard him say he wants to save TikTok. He's met with the TikTok CEO at Mar-a-Lago. In terms of what could happen, so when we say a ban, it's not going to like poof, disappear off of your phone. A couple things will happen. The law, though it's targeting TikTok, it actually applies to the places like the App Store. So that would be on Apple to no longer offer TikTok to be able to be downloaded. Places, companies like Oracle, these servers that are actually hosting the TikTok technology. So those companies would no longer be able to do that. Or I should actually say it would be illegal for them to do so. Now, Trump could, as president, say, actually, you know what, Attorney General Pam Bondi, I don't want you to enforce that, and then that opens up a whole can of legal questions in terms of what happens. But if the ban were to go into effect and those companies were to abide by that law, if you have TikTok already on your phone, you'd still be able to use it, but you'd stop getting updates. Now, the TikTok algorithm is extremely complicated, extremely complex. It's exactly why people love TikTok so much. There are constant updates being pushed to that app. So eventually, probably, I spoke with an insider, an ex-employee of TikTok who worked on that algorithm team. He estimated that within a couple months, TikTok essentially wouldn't be the TikTok that you know anymore because it would be slower. The algorithm would not be feeding you that content you like as accurately as it currently does. But you would still have TikTok on your phone for at least a few months.
So, Danny, I'll ask you. So if this law takes effect, perhaps the Supreme Court doesn't stop it, and a few months down the road, the president, Donald Trump, says, I don't like this. Is there anything he can do about it at that point once the law has taken effect?
Yes, in a way. I mean, he can't strike down the law. He doesn't have that power. But a president has a lot of power, especially under this particular statute, in deciding enforcement and deciding what kind of conduct or what kind of company might fall within the purview. So, and this is very common. A great example is marijuana. Marijuana is still technically illegal in the United States. It's just that the DOJ and the executive branch and the president have decided, yeah, it's a law, but how seriously are we going to take it? President can do the exact same thing with federal law here. He can't get rid of it, but he can do a lot of things in enforcing or slow walking the enforcement of that law.
All right, Danny and Savannah, thank you both. Appreciate it. Big day ahead here.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.